Hi, I'm Ryan from Amber Elm. So this week I started making this. And I thought I'd break down the elements I use to make this lo-fi, chill, hoppy, I'm bad with genres track. And by the way, this video has chapters, so feel free to jump around. For me, it's always easiest when making these tracks to start with something really simple like a chord progression. Nothing too fancy or complicated, and I'll go from there. From that point, there really aren't that many things that need to be added. You get your chord progression, your melody, your drums, your bass, Foley, and extras. A lot of these can literally be dropped into place with sample packs, and I really try to stay away from using sample packs. It's totally fine for people to use them, but for me personally, it takes kind of the fun out of the creative process. The order in which you throw these things together doesn't matter too much. Just kind of do whatever inspires you the most to get started, but I will let screen recording Ryan explain it. So I started with a really basic chord progression, just a 4-chord chord progression on my Poly D. Sounds like this. And so I knew I wanted it to be, pretty vibey, so I went with the Rhodes and started just playing this melody on top of it. And when I was happy with it, I decided it was time to add some ambience in the form of Foley. So I found a campfire sound and a kind of a city noises sound. Of course, EQ'd them, taking off the highs, taking it from this. That campfire to there. And then the city effects. Taking it from that to there. And really the campfire and the city effects kind of almost act like a vinyl crackle instead of having a vinyl crackle in there, which is pretty lo-fi-y. So once I had my Foley in there, blending them in, I wanted to add the drums. And so when I add the drums, this is where you can kind of choose how chill or boom bappy you want your track to be. I already knew I wanted mine to be pretty chill, so I just started with kick and snare. And once I was pretty happy with the really basic kick and snare, I added my hi-hat back in. One of the really important aspects of the lo-fi genre is really the drums and getting those right. So for the hi-hats, basically just added them straight on a grid. Messing with the velocities is pretty important so they don't get so repetitive. And then quantizing them all to 16th notes or however you're playing them, but then giving them a swing so they're not quite on grid. You can do this by just highlighting them all, quantizing them, and then adding a swing to those, or you can go by and hand move them. See if I can expand this a little bit. And really just move them by hand little bits at a time, so they're not just perfectly on grid. And you can do that with a kick and the snare. It's usually nice to have something on one, so everything has something to move off of. It kind of gives it that Jay Dilla-esque kind of quality. So after I was happy with the drums, I went on to bass. Again, I used my Poly D, found a nice little bassy sound, and added those in. And listening back to it a bunch, I felt like it was kind of empty and I needed something else. Nothing too crazy, so I went to the piano just to fill in some of the gaps when it got a little dry. So So all the basic parts of the track are there now. It just needs what I like to call a little bit of the extras. Starting with the drums, you know, drum, kick, snare, and a hi-hat get kind of repetitive and boring over time. So I like to add a little bit more interest and add some Foley. The Foley I added were basically keys, clicking, shaking, and I'll open up Drum Designer so you can see. And then I just kind of filtered them. So for instance, the key click is really high pitch. So I filtered that down. It's barely just a really quiet key click. Same with this kind of Foley shake. You filter those down. Instead of EQing them, I just did them here in the Drum Designer in Logic. And I'm sure every DAW has its own kind of version of this. So I just kind of like to play it in live, and it just kind of fills in the gaps where I feel there are some. And it kind of sounds like this. So once those were to my liking, I moved on to the synth. I really just felt like the synth needed something else. It was getting kind of boring. So what I did, instead of affecting it, I copied it down to its own new track and put, you know, every effect I could on it. I EQ'd it, compressor, little alter boy, where I kind of pitch shift it to the fifths, filter freak on this resonant filter. I pitch corrected it, really just to make it move quickly, kind of give it a little more of a robot-y feel. Added some tremolo. And then on an effect bus, I added a crystallizer. And this kind of was where I really, really liked it. It makes the high pitches sound almost like crickets, which with the campfire I kind of liked. But by itself, it kind of sounds like this. And then blend it in with the original sound. Kind of pan them a little bit. For the piano, I didn't want to do too much. I didn't want to draw too much attention to it, but I did want to add some effects on it. I wanted to put it through a reel-to-reel, give it some reverb, and some tape echo. So here's the piano without any effects. It's a nice little piano sound, but since I want it sitting in the mix in a certain way, went ahead and added. Let's put these back on. I'm sure there's a faster way to do this. If you know, leave it down in the comments. I'd love to know faster ways to do things. All right, so with all of them back on, it kind of just spaces it out a little bit and lets it sit in the mix kind of nicely. And so the last thing I really needed to do was mess around with the arrangement, make an intro. For the intro, I really just grabbed the synthesizers and added a speed up and slow down effect so that it just add a little more interest. And then, if you can see here, added some pauses. So for the pauses, instead of just re-recording everything, all I did was chop it up every half measure and mute every other measure. You can see what that sounds like in a second. So here's with the intro. It's also playing with the Foley. So just to show you sort of how big of a difference it is to add those little extra things, here is that track without any of the pauses. or any of the, well, I'll keep some of the effects on, but without any of the pauses, the arrangement, without the Foley, it sounds a lot different, to my ears at least. Compared to So yeah, I think it makes kind of a big difference to add those little extra things, the arrangement. I could probably do a little more work on the intro, if I'm being honest. It's a little bit boring. But yeah, as the start for a lo-fi track, I think it doesn't get much simpler. They don't have that many aspects, right? Chord progression, melody, some drums, some bass, throw in the Foley, and then do those little extra things like with the arrangement, with the intro, playing with space, playing with cutting out sound. Yeah, that's really it. Back to you, Ryan. So I hope you got something out of this video. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. If you got any tips on things I could be doing better, leave those as well. That's all for this one. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.